Sandra Bullock was still quite young in her career when she got the opportunity that would completely change her life. She had already acted in a few films, but nothing had brought her into the spotlight in the way she dreamed of. She was hardworking, hopeful, and determined, but like many actors starting out, she sometimes felt unsure about her place in Hollywood. At that time, a new project was being cast, and it was called Speed. It was an action film, fast-paced and exciting, and the role of Annie, the brave passenger who ends up driving a bus filled with people, was perfect for someone like Sandra. She was full of energy, charm, and natural warmth. She was thrilled when she was chosen for the part, though she didn't yet realize how much her life would change. On the other side, Keanu Reeves was also building his path in Hollywood. He had already starred in films that showed his talent, but like Sandra, he was still searching for the role that would truly define his career. When he was selected to play Jack Traven, the calm but heroic police officer, he was determined to give it his best. At that time, Keanu was known for his quiet personality. He wasn't someone who sought the spotlight with loud words or big statements. He liked to let his work speak for itself. Many people admired him for being down to earth, though he was already recognized as an actor who could become something much bigger. When Sandra and Keanu first met on the set of Speed, it wasn't dramatic or filled with sparks like in the movies. It was simple. They were introduced by the crew, and they smiled at each other politely. But something about their interaction felt natural. Sandra, always cheerful and playful, made a small joke to ease the first-day nerves. Keanu, being a good listener, gave her one of his quiet smiles and nodded in response. That moment, though small, was the beginning of something unique. While many actors worked together and then quickly moved on with their separate lives, Sandra and Keanu started to notice that they shared the same kind of energy. Both were professional, respectful, and kind-hearted, qualities not always easy to find in the busy and often competitive world of filmmaking. As filming went on, their friendship grew in little ways. Sandra would sometimes bring snacks to the set, and Keanu would always be polite and thank her with a gentle laugh. When the scenes were difficult, like the intense moments on the bus where the characters had to stay calm under pressure, Sandra admired how focused Keanu was. He didn't lose his patience, didn't raise his voice, and always encouraged the people around him to do their best. In return, Keanu noticed that Sandra was not just talented but also full of kindness. Even when she was tired, she still treated every member of the crew with respect, from the director to the assistants. That type of attitude was something Keanu deeply appreciated, because he believed in treating everyone equally. Behind the cameras, their connection only grew stronger. They would sit together during breaks, sharing quiet conversations about their lives. Sandra would often laugh out loud, her joy filling the room, while Keanu would chuckle softly, sometimes adding a witty comment that made her laugh even more. He wasn't a man of many words, but the words he did say mattered. Sandra noticed that about him, and she liked it. She realized that unlike many actors who wanted constant attention, Keanu seemed perfectly fine just being himself, calm and humble. That made him stand out even more in her eyes. Their chemistry on screen soon became obvious to everyone. When audiences later watched Speed, they felt the strong connection between the two characters, Annie and Jack. What most people didn't know was that this connection came from a genuine friendship that had formed behind the scenes. Sandra and Keanu were not pretending to respect each other, they truly did. They weren't faking their comfort together, it was real. This was why their performances felt so believable and why the film became such a huge success. It wasn't just the thrilling plot that drew people in, it was also the natural bond between the two stars. As the movie's release date approached, Sandra started to feel nervous. She didn't know if people would accept her in such a big role. She had always been a little shy about praise and never liked to think of herself as a big star. Keanu, in his quiet way, noticed this. He never tried to overwhelm her with words, but he always made sure to reassure her through small gestures. He would tell her that she was doing a great job, or he would casually mention how much fun it was working with her. These little things, though simple, meant a lot to Sandra. They reminded her that she wasn't alone in this journey. When Speed was finally released, it became an instant hit. Sandra's career changed overnight. Suddenly, everyone knew her name, and she was called America's sweetheart. Keanu also received praise for his performance, and the movie solidified his place as a leading actor. But even with all the fame and attention, both of them remained humble. They gave interviews where they spoke kindly of each other, never trying to take the spotlight away from the other. Sandra would laugh and say how lucky she felt to have worked with Keanu, while Keanu would quietly nod and say how talented Sandra was. Their respect for each other was clear for the world to see. Over time, as they moved on to other projects, Sandra and Keanu stayed in touch. They weren't the kind of friends who needed to talk every day, but whenever their paths crossed, the connection was still there, strong and genuine. Sandra once admitted in an interview that she had a crush on Keanu while filming Speed, though she never told him at the time. Years later, Keanu confessed that he also had a crush on her back then. Both of them laughed when they realized they had never known about each other's feelings, and perhaps that was part of what kept their friendship so pure. It was never complicated, never filled with drama, just mutual admiration and kindness. This friendship, built on honesty and respect, was the foundation that would later matter so much. Because in the world of fame, where criticism is constant and unkind words can hurt deeply, Sandra would one day face a moment where she felt insulted and small. But when that moment came, it wasn't her own strength alone that carried her through. It was Keanu's response, calm, supportive, and full of respect, that turned everything around. Their story, which had begun years earlier on a film set with simple smiles and polite jokes, was about to show the world the true meaning of friendship and loyalty. Sandra Bullock was enjoying the rise of her career after Speed. Everywhere she went, people recognized her as the bright, funny, and lovable actress who could light up a room with her smile. She had more movie offers, interviews, and red carpet events than ever before. It was an exciting time, but it was also overwhelming. Fame is not always easy, and along with praise comes criticism. Sandra knew this, but even then, some comments could still hurt more than she expected. At one special event, she had been invited to attend alongside many other well-known stars. The atmosphere was glamorous. Bright lights flashed from every corner as photographers tried to capture every moment. People dressed in designer clothes walked the carpet with confidence, while reporters called out names, asking questions about upcoming films. Sandra, looking stunning in her elegant gown, carried herself with grace. She smiled for pictures, greeted fans, and tried to enjoy the evening as best as she could. Deep down, though, she always felt a little shy at such events. While she loved acting, she wasn't always comfortable with the endless attention outside of work. That night, something unexpected happened. In the middle of casual conversations, a remark was made that caught Sandra off guard. It wasn't said kindly, and it wasn't hidden. Someone questioned her acting skills, suggesting she wasn't as talented as people believed. They even mentioned her appearance, making it sound as though she only became popular because of her looks, not her talent. The words were sharp, and though Sandra tried to laugh it off in front of others, the sting was real. For Sandra, it wasn't the first time she had faced criticism, but hearing it so directly in a public place was different. She felt her cheeks flush, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Should she defend herself? Should she walk away? She chose to stay quiet, smiling politely, as if it didn't matter. But inside, it hurt. The comment made her doubt herself, even if only for a second. She thought of all the effort she had put into her work, the long hours on set, the commitment to every role, the emotional energy she poured into her characters. Yet, In that instant, it seemed as though all of it had been dismissed by a few careless words. Keanu Reeves was nearby, listening quietly. He had always been observant, someone who noticed the small details others might miss. From the way Sandra's smile wavered for just a moment, he knew she was uncomfortable. Keanu was no stranger to criticism himself. Over the years, he too had faced unkind comments, sometimes about his style of acting, other times about his personality. But he had learned to remain calm and let his actions speak louder than words. Still, seeing Sandra in that situation stirred something in him. He knew she didn't deserve to feel belittled, not after everything she had achieved. Instead of letting the remark linger in the air, Keanu chose to step in. With his usual calm and composed manner, he addressed the situation without raising his voice or making it feel confrontational. He looked directly at Sandra and said something that instantly shifted the mood. He spoke about her dedication, her natural talent, and the joy she brought not only to her co-stars but also to audiences around the world. He reminded everyone present that Sandra wasn't just a pretty face, she was a skilled actress who worked tirelessly to bring her characters to life. His words were firm but kind, spoken in a way that left no room for argument. The effect was immediate. The unkind comment was silenced, replaced by an atmosphere of respect. Those who had been watching the exchange nodded, clearly moved by Keanu's response. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't loud, but it carried weight because it came from him. Everyone knew Keanu's reputation for honesty and humility. He wasn't the type of person to say something just to impress others. When he spoke, people believed him, because his words always matched his actions. Sandra felt a rush of relief. She hadn't expected Keanu to say anything, but hearing his words made her heart swell with gratitude. It wasn't just about defending her talent, it was about the way he had done it. He had stood by her side with respect and sincerity, showing everyone that she was more than capable of earning her place in the industry. In that moment, she realized just how rare it was to have someone like Keanu in her life. Many people in Hollywood were focused only on themselves, but Keanu had shown that he valued loyalty and kindness above everything else. The evening continued, but Sandra carried his words with her long after. She smiled more freely, feeling lighter, almost as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When people came up to talk to her afterward, she was able to enjoy the conversations again, no longer haunted by the earlier remark. Keanu had shifted the entire mood, not just for her but for everyone who had witnessed the exchange. Later, when she reflected on the incident, Sandra realized how easy it would have been for Keanu to stay silent. After all, he wasn't the one being criticized. He could have ignored it, or he could have laughed along to avoid any tension. But that wasn't who Keanu was. His quiet strength came from knowing when to speak and what to say. In standing up for her, he had reminded Sandra of her own worth and reminded others to show respect where it was due. It wasn't the first time Keanu had shown this side of himself, but for Sandra, it was one of the most meaningful. She remembered how they had built their friendship on set, through small conversations and mutual admiration. This moment proved to her that their bond wasn't just surface level. It was real, deep, and built on genuine care. Keanu didn't just see her as a co-star or another actress in Hollywood. He saw her as a person, someone worth defending when the world tried to bring her down. After the event, when the cameras were off and the crowd had dispersed, Sandra found a moment to thank him. She looked at him with her warm smile, this time filled with emotion. Keanu, in his simple way, just shrugged and said something like, "You deserve it." That was all. No long speeches, no dramatic gestures. Just a quiet reminder that he meant every word he had said earlier. That night became a memory Sandra would hold close for years to come. She knew that in Hollywood, not everyone had the courage to stand up for others. People often thought about their own image first. But Keanu was different. His response had not only changed the tone of that night but had also changed how Sandra looked at herself in moments of doubt. Whenever criticism came her way in the future, she would remember his words and the way he had stood by her side. It gave her strength, reminding her that she was more than enough. And while fans didn't know the details of that evening until later, those who eventually heard the story admired Keanu even more. His actions reflected the person he truly was: humble, kind, and unshakably respectful. For Sandra, it was more than a moment, it was proof that true friendship and loyalty could shine even brighter than the lights of Hollywood. The days after that unforgettable event stayed with Sandra Bullock longer than she expected. Though she continued with her busy schedule, doing interviews, filming new projects, and attending glamorous events, the memory of Keanu's response remained clear in her heart. She thought about the way he had handled the situation without anger, without showing off, and without turning it into a bigger scene. Instead, his calm words had carried strength, and that strength had lifted her when she needed it most. It made her reflect on how rare it was to have someone who would stand up for you so naturally, without expecting anything in return. Sandra had always been known for her charm and humor, but deep down, she was also sensitive. She cared about what people thought, even if she pretended she didn't. That night, the harsh words could have left her shaken for a long time, but Keanu's presence had turned it around. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that his quiet act of support had made a lasting impact not just on her but on everyone who had seen it. People in Hollywood often said that kindness was a weakness, but Keanu had shown that it was actually a strength. Keanu himself didn't mention the incident again. For him, it was simple. He had done what felt right. He wasn't looking for attention, nor did he want praise. That was simply his nature. He believed in treating people with respect, and when someone he cared about was hurt, he couldn't stay silent. He continued with his life as usual, focusing on his work and keeping his private world quiet. If Sandra brought it up in conversation, he would listen, smile, and brush it off, as if it wasn't a big deal. But for her, it was. As their friendship grew deeper, Sandra began to notice even more about Keanu's character. He was different from many of the people she met in the film industry. While others rushed to talk about themselves, Keanu listened. While others competed for the spotlight, Keanu stepped back, letting others shine. And while others sometimes joined in with gossip or unkind jokes, Keanu remained respectful, never lowering himself to make someone else feel small. Sandra admired this about him. It wasn't just his talent as an actor that made him special, it was the way he carried himself as a person. One afternoon, while they were catching up between projects, Sandra found herself thinking back to that painful night. She decided to share her feelings more openly with Keanu. She told him how much his response had meant to her, how it had helped her push away the doubt that had started to creep into her mind. Keanu listened quietly, nodding from time to time. When she finished, he looked at her with sincerity and simply said, "You work too hard to let words like that matter." It wasn't a long speech, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. That was Keanu's gift. He knew how to say the right thing in the simplest way. As the years passed, Sandra and Keanu continued to cross paths in Hollywood. Fans and reporters often hoped they would date, because their chemistry was undeniable. Both admitted in later interviews that they had secretly liked each other at different times, but neither had ever confessed it back then. Instead, they chose to remain close friends, and in many ways, that decision made their bond even stronger. Without the pressure of romance or the spotlight on their personal lives, they were free to simply be there for one another, celebrating successes and offering comfort in hard times. For Sandra, Keanu's support during that night became a reminder of the kind of people she wanted around her. She learned to surround herself with friends who lifted her up instead of dragging her down. Hollywood was filled with pressure, and it was easy to lose confidence when people criticized every little thing, from your clothes to your performances. But whenever she thought of that evening, She remembered that one sincere voice could cancel out 100 negative ones. Keanu's calm defense of her had been that voice. The story of what had happened spread quietly among those who had been there. Some of the people who had witnessed the exchange told others, and over time, fans also learned about it. The reaction was powerful. People admired Sandra for the way she handled the insult with grace, but they admired Keanu even more for the way he had stepped in. The world already knew him as an actor who brought depth to his roles, but now people began to talk more about his character off-screen. It wasn't just his movies that made him beloved, it was the way he treated others in real life. Keanu never paid attention to the praise. When interviewers asked him about Sandra, he would only say kind things, focusing on her achievements and her personality. He never brought up that night, because he didn't see it as a heroic act. For him, it was simply what anyone should do: stand up for a friend, show kindness, and protect someone's dignity. But Sandra knew better. She knew that not everyone would have done the same. In her world, full of flashing lights and endless attention, true loyalty was rare. Keanu's response had shown her what genuine respect looked like. Sandra began to carry herself with even more confidence. She took on roles that challenged her, pushing herself as an actress. She accepted that criticism would always come, but she didn't let it control her anymore. Whenever she doubted herself, she remembered Keanu's words and his steady voice. She remembered that night when he had shifted the room with nothing but truth and sincerity. That memory gave her courage, reminding her that she had earned her place in Hollywood through hard work, not by chance. Meanwhile, Keanu continued on his own journey. He starred in films that would later define his career, facing his own share of ups and downs in life. Through it all, he remained consistent, kind, humble, and grounded. His friendship with Sandra became one of the most admired in Hollywood, not because of drama or gossip, but because it was based on mutual respect and care. Fans loved hearing about their bond, because it gave them hope that real friendships could exist even in an industry often filled with competition and pride. The memory of that night never left Sandra. It was a turning point, a reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the biggest impact. One simple response had changed everything: not just the mood of an evening, but the way she saw herself and her place in the world. And for Keanu, it was nothing more than being true to who he was. That was the beauty of their story. Sandra often thought about the journey that had brought her to where she was. She remembered the nervous young woman she had been when she first stepped onto the set of Speed and how unsure she had felt about herself. Then she thought about how much her life had changed since then. She had won awards, starred in many successful films, and become one of the most loved actresses in Hollywood. But what meant even more than fame was the respect she had earned from people she truly admired. Keanu Reeves was one of those people, and his quiet act of support on that difficult evening had left a mark on her heart that time could not erase. After that night, Sandra found herself looking at Keanu differently. She had always respected him as an actor and liked him as a friend, but now she saw him as someone who carried a rare kind of strength. He didn't have to shout to be heard or put others down to look powerful. His strength came from his calmness, his kindness, and his ability to see the good in people. That was the kind of strength Sandra wanted in her own life. She remembered how lonely the entertainment world could feel at times. People often smiled at you when the cameras were on, but behind closed doors, not everyone wished you well. Hollywood was a place full of praise one moment and harsh judgment the next. Sandra had learned that lesson many times. But Keanu reminded her that real connections still existed. His words that night had been more than just comfort, they had been a shield. They had protected her from doubt, from embarrassment, and from letting negativity steal her confidence. Sandra later admitted to her close friends that she had never forgotten that moment. Whenever she felt low or when critics questioned her abilities, she thought back to Keanu's response. It was like a voice in her memory, telling her that she was enough, that she was more than enough. She didn't need to prove herself to people who didn't value her hard work. All she needed to do was stay true to herself, just as Keanu did every day. For Sandra, the turning point came not only from Keanu's defense but also from what it revealed about friendship. She realized that true friends are not the ones who only celebrate you when things are easy. True friends are the ones who stand with you when things are hard, when you are vulnerable, when you are being doubted or insulted. Keanu had shown her that kind of loyalty. It wasn't planned, it wasn't for show, and it wasn't because cameras were watching. It was simply who he was, and that made it even more meaningful. Over time, Sandra began to grow even more confident in herself. She took on challenging roles, like the romantic comedies that showed her humor and the dramatic roles that showed her depth. She won awards and was praised for her talent, but in her heart, she knew that one of the reasons she kept moving forward was because she had people like Keanu who believed in her. That belief mattered more than any trophy or headline. Keanu, on the other hand, continued to live in his quiet way. He never made a big deal out of what had happened. If someone brought it up, he would smile and gently change the subject. He didn't need recognition for what he had done, because for him, standing up for someone he cared about was the natural thing to do. That humility was what made him stand out even more. In a world where so many people wanted credit for every good deed, Keanu stayed silent, letting his actions speak for themselves. Sandra often joked that Keanu was like a real-life hero. He wasn't flashy, he didn't wear a cape, and he didn't look for applause. But when the moment came, he stepped up, not because he wanted to be noticed, but because he wanted to do what was right. And that, to her, was the definition of a true hero. The impact of his support didn't just end with Sandra. It touched others who heard the story. Fans admired him, young actors looked up to him, and even people outside of Hollywood found inspiration in his actions. Many said that his response had reminded them of the importance of standing up for one another. Words could hurt deeply, but words could also heal. Keanu's calm defense had been proof of that. Sandra sometimes wondered how different her life might have felt if he hadn't spoken up that night. Maybe she would have carried the sting of that insult for much longer, letting it affect her choices or her confidence. Maybe she would have doubted herself in ways that could have slowed her career. But because Keanu had spoken, because he had reminded her of her value, she had walked away stronger. That single moment had shaped the way she saw herself and the way she handled criticism in the years that followed. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this was the true gift of their friendship. It wasn't about being in the same movies or walking the same red carpets. It was about the way they supported each other as people, not just as actors. Sandra could laugh with Keanu, confide in him, and trust that he would always be honest with her. And in turn, she always admired him, stood by him, and celebrated his successes. Their bond became something that fans loved to talk about. Whenever Sandra mentioned Keanu in an interview, people lit up. She spoke about him with genuine warmth, calling him kind and thoughtful. Keanu, in his own way, also praised Sandra, talking about her talent and the light she brought into every room. Neither of them ever exaggerated or played up their friendship for attention. It was simply real, and that's why people admired it so much. For Sandra, the turning point of that evening remained one of the most powerful memories of her career. It had taught her that no matter how strong you are, everyone needs support sometimes. And it had shown her that the people who truly matter will always rise to the occasion when you need them most. Keanu's response had not just changed how others saw her, it had changed how she saw herself. It had given her the courage to keep believing in her work, her passion, and her worth. Years later, when she looked back on her journey, Sandra often smiled at the thought of Keanu's simple but powerful words. They had been a shield in a moment of weakness, and they had stayed with her like a quiet echo of encouragement. She carried that moment with her into every film, every challenge, and every success. And though Keanu never spoke of it again, she knew that his act of kindness had been one of the defining points of her story. As the years passed, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves continued to walk their own paths in Hollywood. Both had long, remarkable careers, filled with ups and downs, triumphs and heartbreaks. But through it all, one thing never changed: the respect and care they held for one another. That night when Keanu spoke up for Sandra had become a quiet symbol of their bond. It was not something they talked about often, nor was it ever used for publicity. Instead, it lived in Sandra's memory as a private treasure, a moment of true friendship that showed her what loyalty really meant. Sandra went on to star in comedies, dramas, thrillers, and even animated films. She became an Oscar-winning actress, a producer, and someone admired around the world. People often described her as strong, witty, and grounded, someone who never let fame change her. Yet, she would sometimes admit in interviews that even she had moments of doubt. Being in the public eye meant hearing constant opinions about your work, your looks, your choices. It could wear you down. But whenever she remembered Keanu's steady voice and kind words, she felt lifted. That memory became a tool she carried with her. It reminded her that true value does not come from pleasing critics or strangers, but from staying true to yourself and listening to the people who genuinely know your worth. Keanu's career also soared. He became the face of blockbuster franchises, admired not only for his acting but also for his humility. While others around him chased attention, Keanu remained private and thoughtful. He lived simply, avoiding the loud lifestyle that many in Hollywood embraced. Stories often surfaced about his kindness to fans, his generosity to strangers, and his habit of treating everyone with equal respect. To the world, he became a symbol of grace and quiet strength. And for Sandra, he remained the same Keanu she had first met on the set of Speed: calm, kind, and reliable. The bond between Sandra and Keanu continued to fascinate fans. Every time they appeared together, whether in an interview or on stage, people felt the warmth of their connection. They laughed easily around each other, finishing sentences, teasing lightly, and showing a comfort that only came from years of genuine friendship. Audiences loved seeing them together, not because of romance or drama, but because it felt real. It was rare in Hollywood to see two stars with such an unshakable bond, one built not on fame but on trust. Sandra sometimes shared in interviews how much she admired Keanu. She spoke about his thoughtfulness, his gentle nature, and how he always carried himself with quiet dignity. She recalled how he once showed up at her house with champagne and truffles, just to share a small, random moment of kindness. Keanu, in turn, always described Sandra with respect, calling her talented, funny, and an absolute joy to be around. Neither exaggerated. They simply spoke the truth, and the truth was that their friendship was one of the strongest connections in their lives. The moment when Keanu defended Sandra stayed with her as an example of why she admired him so deeply. To her, that wasn't just a passing act of kindness, it was proof of his character. It was one thing to smile for the cameras and another to show true loyalty when no one expected it. Keanu's response that night had changed everything: not just the way people looked at her, but the way she looked at herself. She realized that sometimes, even when you are successful, you need someone to remind you of your worth. And sometimes, one person's calm voice can silence all the negativity around you. As Sandra grew older, she became more open about how she chose to live her life. She valued peace, kindness, and honesty above all else. She avoided unnecessary drama, much like Keanu, and focused on her family and the people she loved. Looking back, she often thought about the lessons she had learned from her journey. She had learned that fame was temporary, but character was lasting. She had learned that criticism was unavoidable, but it didn't define you. And most importantly, she had learned that the people who truly matter will always stand with you when the world tries to push you down. Keanu and Sandra remained close, and though fans often wished they would become a couple, they seemed perfectly content with their friendship. In fact, that was what made their story so beautiful. It showed that men and women in Hollywood could share a bond that wasn't complicated by gossip or expectation. Their friendship was pure, lasting, and based on genuine care. It became a reminder to people everywhere that love doesn't always have to be romantic. Sometimes, the most powerful form of love is friendship itself, the kind that lifts you up, protects you, and stays with you through the years. Whenever Sandra thought back to the night she was insulted, she no longer felt the sting of those words. Instead, she felt gratitude. She was thankful that Keanu had been there, that he had spoken with sincerity, and that his response had turned a painful moment into a lasting source of strength. What could have been a memory of embarrassment became, instead, a memory of loyalty and kindness. And that, in many ways, changed her life. The story of Sandra and Keanu continues to inspire people. It teaches that kindness matters, that standing up for others matters, and that even the smallest acts of support can leave the biggest impact. It shows that true strength doesn't come from raising your voice, but from speaking with honesty and respect. And it reminds us all that in a world full of noise, sometimes one calm voice can truly change everything. For Sandra, Keanu's words became more than just comfort, they became a guide. She learned to handle future criticism with grace, to laugh at negativity, and to remember that her value was not for others to decide. For Keanu, the moment was just another example of living according to his principles, but for Sandra, it was unforgettable. It showed her what real friendship looked like, and it gave her a confidence that carried her through every stage of her career. In the end, their story isn't about a single insult or even about a single response. It's about the power of loyalty, the beauty of friendship, and the impact of kindness. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves showed the world that true respect doesn't fade with time. And while their movies brought people excitement, it was their real-life connection that brought people hope.